Hey, welcome back to Cruising in Style with K and M, the show where we help couples and families get the most out of travel. I'm Mark, and along with my wife Kim, we're here every week with real tips, honest advice, and the kind of insider knowledge that only comes from people who actually love to cruise. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. And if today's show helps you out, we'd love it if you'd give us a like and share it with a friend who loves to travel. It truly helps us grow. All right, let's get into it.
Welcome to The Debate. Every year, cruise passengers hand over more than $1.2 billion for shore excursions.
Yeah, it is a truly staggering amount of money.
Right, just an incredible amount exchanging hands at the excursions desk. But what if I told you that up to 60% of that money isn't actually paying for your snorkeling trip or, your ruins tour?
Exactly. It's paying for this invisible, highly contested insurance policy that you may or may not actually need.
Which brings us to the central question of our discussion today. For a budget-conscious family planning their very first cruise vacation, do the significantly higher costs of ship-sponsored excursions represent genuine value and necessary protection, or
are they merely an overpriced convenience that exploits anxiety and limits authentic cultural immersion?
Precisely. And today, we are drawing directly on industry data, specifically the latest economic impact reports from the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association, legal analyses of passenger litigation, and comparative operational data from independent tour operators.
Lots of dense material to dig into.
Definitely. Now, I represent the cautious traveler, arguing that ship-sponsored tours provide essential security, legal protection, and logistical guarantees that are absolutely invaluable for first-time cruisers.
And I represent the adventurous explorer, arguing that independent excursions offer vastly superior financial savings, smaller groups, and deeper cultural immersion, entirely without sacrificing safety.
So let's just establish our core positions before we get into the actual mechanics of how this works on the ground.
Sure.
From my perspective, we really have to look at the psychological and logistical reality of family travel. I mean, when a family on a strict budget takes their first cruise, the sheer unpredictability of navigating foreign ports with kids, it requires the insulated safety of a ship-sponsored tour.
But is it actual safety or just the feeling of safety?
It's both. We are not just talking about the convenience of having a ticket handed to you in your stateroom, though, let's be honest, that is nice.
Sure, it's nice.
But we're talking about an ironclad guarantee. The premium paid for a ship tour means the ship will wait if the tour runs late, period. It means the operators have been systematically vetted by a multi-billion-dollar corporation.
Right, the corporate vetting process.
Exactly. And in the absolute worst-case scenario of an injury, passengers are protected by U.S. maritime law and the cruise line's centralized liability structure. That peace of mind, it's an invaluable asset when you're in a totally unfamiliar environment.
Well, I hear you, but the safety monopoly the cruise lines project is largely an illusion. I mean, it's carefully maintained and marketed specifically to justify these exorbitant markups.
An illusion? That's a bit strong, don't you think?
Not at all. Independent tours allow budget-conscious families to save anywhere from 30 to 60% on the exact same excursions. And more than that, they provide a significantly better product.
Better how?
Well, you are looking at intimate groups, maybe 8 to 12 people, rather than, being herded onto a massive motor coach with up to 100 other passengers.
Yeah, but what about the risk of missing the ship?
As for the primary fear of being left behind at the port, reputable independent operators offer their own rigorous guarantees and logistical backups that entirely negate that fear. They absorb the risk so the family doesn't have to.
Let's start right there with the financial mechanics, because the sticker shock is usually the very first thing a family encounters. How are you evaluating the true cost versus the perceived value of these tours?
Well, let's look at the actual numbers on the ground, because the price differences are frankly staggering. If we look at the data out of Cozumel, Mexico.
Great example.
Right. A family of 4 could easily pay up to $360 for a ship-sponsored Jeep tour. But if that same family takes like 10 minutes to book directly with a local, independent operator, That exact same experience runs about $180 to $220 total.
Wow, half the price.
Basically, and we see the exact same pattern with a basic snorkeling tour. It's $89 to $119 per person through the ship versus maybe $50 directly with the operator. The cruise lines are consistently marking up local tours by 30 to 60%.
But they're providing a service for that markup.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The industry data reveals that across these participating destinations, passengers are spending $1.19 billion annually on shore excursions. The cruise line is acting as a massive middleman, taking a huge cut of that $1 billion just for facilitating a transaction.
Okay, but
Families are systematically overpaying for identical experiences just because they bought it at a desk on deck 5.
look, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. That markup is not just a middleman fee. It is effectively an insurance policy and a massive logistical lever for a seamless vacation.
An insurance policy?
Yes. The data also shows us that over 58% of transit passengers buy a shore excursion, and of those, a staggering 74% buy them directly through the cruise line. Why do you think that is?
Because of the marketing.
No, it's not just because they're ignorant of the internet or brainwashed by marketing. It's because decision fatigue is incredibly real. A first-time cruising family is already navigating flights, packing, embarkation protocols.
Navigating the buffet?
Exactly. Ship navigation is a lot. Paying that premium buys them cognitive relief. And furthermore, you have to look at the mechanics of actually getting off the ship. Have you factored in tender ports?
Tendering, right?
Yeah, where the ship anchors offshore and passengers have to take those small boats to land. Guests on ship-sponsored tours get priority disembarkation. If you have 3,000 people trying to get onto boats that hold 80 people, the cruise line controls the tickets.
Sure, they hold the cards there.
Right. If you book their tour, you are escorted to a private lounge, handed a coffee, and walked straight onto the first boat. If you go independent, well, you could lose an hour or more of your port day just sitting in a stairwell waiting for your number to be called. That lost time has a very high monetary and experiential value.
The tendering priority is, I'll admit, a fair logistical point. And I acknowledge that convenience has a price tag. But it doesn't justify a 60% markup across the board.
For some families, it absolutely does.
But does it justify the $1,200 a family of 4 could save over a 7-day cruise by booking independently? I mean, think about what a budget-conscious family could do with an extra $1,200.
That's a lot of money, yes.
Exactly. The cruise lines use the convenience factor as a lever, but the heaviest lever they use is fear. They deliberately shift the narrative from the upfront financial cost of the tour to the hidden financial risk of the logistics.
But that risk is real. You keep bringing up these financial savings as the ultimate equalizer for that price difference, but let's look at how those logistics actually play out when the clock is ticking.
Okay, let's look at it.
The mental load I mentioned is directly tied to the physical reality of getting left behind. The ultimate trump card of a ship-sponsored tour is the absolute certainty of departure.
The famous, the ship will wait argument.
Because it's true. If the cruise line's motor coach blows a tire on a mountain road, the captain holds the ship. It is that simple. If an independent tours van breaks down, the family is stranded.
But how often does that actually happen?
Often enough to ruin a vacation. For a family on a strict budget, they simply cannot afford the out-of-pocket costs of booking last-minute international flights, ground transportation, and hotel rooms just to catch the ship at the next port of call.
Right.
That catastrophic expense would completely wipe out the $150 they saved by booking the tour locally. The premium you pay is the price of certainty.
Okay, that's a compelling argument. But have you considered the actual track record and operational mechanics of established local operators? To call the risk catastrophic ignores how the independent market has actually evolved.
How so?
Well, look at the source material. It highlights Cozumel Cruise Tours, right? A local family business that has operated since 1996. In nearly 30 years and tens of thousands of tours, they have a perfect record of never making a single guest miss a ship.
Well, past performance doesn't guarantee future results.
But they don't just guess the time either. They build their entire schedule around the ship's specific departure time, leaving a strict 60-minute buffer, and their dispatchers track the maritime schedules in real time.
Still, a buffer isn't a guarantee.
But large independent aggregators like the Shore Excursions Group explicitly offer a $1,000 back-to-ship guarantee. This isn't just a promise, it's an operational protocol. If a delay occurs, they have local agents who handle the accommodations, the meals, and the transportation to the next port. They actively absorb the financial risk themselves.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, honestly, because a local guarantee, while admirable on paper, doesn't carry the immediate logistical weight of the ship's captain holding the vessel.
How is $1,000 not logistical weight?
Let's walk through the scenario. Even with a $1,000 guarantee, if you miss the ship, you are still standing on a foreign dock as the sun goes down. Your luggage, your passports, your kids' medications, they are all still in your cabin sailing away.
That's stressful.
You are forced to navigate emergency international travel, relying on a third party's hotline to hopefully reimburse you or book you a hotel. It is a highly traumatic event for a family.
But again, it's so rare.
But let's take this a step further. Missing the ship is actually the best case, worst case scenario.
Wait, really? The best case, worst case?
Yes. What happens when the stakes aren't just financial but physical? If someone gets hurt on that independent tour, that third-party guarantee vanishes and you are suddenly dealing with foreign courts.
Ah, I see. You are talking about the legal liability differences if an injury occurs.
Exactly. If we look at the litigation data regarding passenger injuries, the legal protections provided by a ship-sponsored tour are vastly superior.
Vastly?
Yes. Think about it. If a family member is tragically injured on an independent shore excursion, suing a foreign operator poses massive, often insurmountable jurisdictional hurdles in U.S. courts.
Sure, international jurisdiction is tricky.
Often, foreign operators have limited or no contacts with the state you live in, making it nearly impossible to even establish personal jurisdiction to file a lawsuit. But if you booked a ship-sponsored tour, the legal mechanics change entirely.
How so?
Because the local guide is standing there holding a branded cruise line sign, right? And wearing their uniform, the law essentially treats them as an employee or agent of the ship. It is called ostensible agency.
Ostensible agency, right.
The cruise line requires them to display the ship's signage, which creates an agency relationship in the eyes of the law. You can sue the multi-billion-dollar corporation right here in a U.S. federal court.
Okay.
And under general maritime law, joint and several liability applies. This means a plaintiff can collect the full amount of a judgment directly from the cruise line if negligence in vetting that tour operator can be established. For a family, having a solvent, centralized U.S. liability target is a massive, unseen value.
Look, I have to push back incredibly hard on that framing. I mean, I certainly acknowledge that suing a foreign entity is difficult, but we really need to translate what those cruise line legal protections actually look like in reality.
They look like a legal pathway in U.S. courts.
But you are painting the passenger ticket contract as this protective shield for the family, when in fact it is an incredibly dense, restrictive maritime contract designed entirely to protect the cruise line.
Well, contracts protect the drafter, sure.
But the legal analysis clearly points out that these contracts feature shockingly strict limitations. Let me give you an example. Imagine a family gets back from a cruise where someone broke their ankle on a tour. They go home, deal with the surgeries, the rehab, and I don't know, 6 months later they finally call a lawyer.
Right, that happens.
The lawyer looks at the back of their cruise ticket and says, "I'm sorry, you had exactly 6 months to notify the cruise line in writing, and you are at day 185. Your case is dismissed."
State laws are preempted.
Exactly. State laws that usually give you 2 or 3 years to file a personal injury claim are preempted by general maritime law, which dictates a strict 1-year statute of limitations to actually file the lawsuit.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Yes, the timeline is strict, the cruise lines are corporations managing risk, and they dictate the venue and the timeline. But the mechanism still exists to hold them accountable.
But look at how aggressively they fight to avoid that accountability. Even in that federal venue you mentioned, the cruise lines fight tooth and nail to disclaim liability.
Well, of course they defend themselves.
They explicitly argue in court that these tour operators are independent contractors specifically to sever that ostensible agency you just described. And let's explain the zone of danger test because this is crucial for families. Under maritime law, if a parent witnesses their child get seriously injured on an excursion, that parent cannot recover damages for their own emotional distress unless they were also in immediate physical danger of being hit by the same bus or falling off the same cliff.
So bystander claims are barred?
Completely barred. Furthermore, the source material notes how cruise lines advocate for federal maritime law when it limits passenger claims, but then hypocritically argue for state law when they want to limit the recovery of past medical expenses to discounted insurance rates. The idea that booking through the ship wraps you in an impenetrable legal blanket is just not supported by the gritty reality of how aggressively cruise lines litigate against their own passengers.
I don't disagree that the legal maneuvering is complex and, frankly, highly adversarial. But the fact remains that federal law explicitly voids any attempt by the cruise line to disclaim liability for their own direct negligence in vetting and hiring these operators.
If you can prove they were negligent in vetting,
Exactly. My point is not that suing a cruise line is easy. My point is that a legal pathway actually exists against a U.S.-facing entity. If you're dealing with an unvetted vendor you met outside the port gates in another country, your legal pathway is practically zero.
well,
You have no recourse. But look, let's step back. We are diving deep into the absolute worst-case scenarios here.
yeah.
Lawsuits, broken bones, missing ships.
Yeah, it got a bit dark.
Most passengers aren't dealing with any of that. So let's shift from the mechanics of risk to the actual mechanics of the vacation. We are talking about the quality of the day spent in port.
I am so glad we are pivoting here because this is where the independent tours unequivocally shine. We need to contrast the reality of mass convenience with genuine cultural immersion.
Mass convenience versus immersion.
Okay, let's look at what you are actually buying with that premium. The reality of a ship-sponsored tour is often 40 to 100 people packed tightly onto a motor coach.
That's a standard bus tour.
Right, and you're moving at the speed of the slowest passenger. It is a rigid one-size-fits-all schedule with zero flexibility. If you are a family with kids and your child is exhausted, or maybe they are fascinated by a specific ruin and want to stay 20 minutes longer, you cannot.
You have to stay on schedule.
You are continually marched back to the bus by a guide with a clipboard. Now contrast that with an independent tour. We are looking at group caps of maybe 8 to 12 people.
Which sounds great, but
In many European ports, you can literally hire a private car and driver for $150 to $300 a day for a couple. You can move at your own pace, ask the guide direct, meaningful questions, and visit authentic, family-owned local spots instead of those massive tourist-trapped restaurants that are specifically designed to feed 50 bus passengers at once.
I hear the appeal of that, truly. The romanticism of small group travel is undeniable, and, a private car in the Mediterranean sounds lovely.
It is lovely.
But I must challenge the assumption that mass market inherently means low quality or a lack of genuine immersion. The data simply does not support the idea that passengers are miserable on these large tours.
Oh, really?
Yeah, let's look at the destination satisfaction data, which uses a 10-point scale. Guided tours scored an impressive 8.33 out of 10.
that is a highly satisfied demographic. When we look at cultural immersion, interactions like the friendliness of residents scored 8.29, and historic sites and museums scored 7.70. You have to ask yourself why these scores are so high if the experience is supposedly so restrictive.
I think I know why.
Well, I think it goes back to that cognitive offloading. A family on their very first cruise might find independent travel in a foreign country highly stressful. Trying to figure out the local currency, navigating language barriers, or figuring out the train schedule can induce anxiety that entirely ruins the day.
Sure, transit can be tricky.
That 8.33 score isn't about the quality of the bus seat. It is about the relief of offloading responsibility. To a stressed parent, a predefined schedule feels like a luxury. It allows them to actually relax and absorb the history safely.
I come at it from a completely different way. Those satisfaction scores reflect a baseline expectation, not the ceiling of what travel can be.
What do you mean?
When passengers say they are satisfied with a ship tour, they are satisfied relative to their expectation of a standard bus tour. They don't know what they missed.
That's a bit presumptuous.
No, it's reality. They don't know the difference between the $129 ship sold Santorini Highlights tour and the $45 local operator tour that goes to the exact same spots, but with a fraction of the people.
But the ship tour has oversight.
The independent local operator has their personal livelihood and community reputation on the line every single day. A massive cruise ship selling a subcontracted tour has much less personal stake in your granular minute-by-minute experience.
Interesting point.
And let's talk about the logistics of real immersion. In some ports, you can take a local metro ticket in Rome to the major attractions for just a few euros, compared to a $99 cruise line transfer. The cultural immersion of actually riding the local transit, being among the people, is entirely lost when you are isolated behind the tinted glass of a branded motor coach.
But again, that assumes the family has the bandwidth to figure out the Roman metro system in the middle of summer with 3 kids in tow.
It's not that hard.
Which is a massive assumption for a first-time cruiser. There is a huge difference between theoretical immersion and the on-the-ground reality of family travel stress. But look, as we look toward the end of our discussion, let's summarize our core takeaways for that budget-conscious family preparing for their first sailing.
Sounds good.
From my standpoint, when planning a family's first cruise, the priorities absolutely must be logistical security, the guaranteed return to the ship, and the centralized liability of a U.S.-facing entity. The premium price tag of a ship-sponsored tour is not just an overpriced ticket for a seat on a bus, it is an active risk mitigation strategy.
A very expensive one.
But the ship waits, the operators are strictly vetted, and the legal framework, while incredibly complex, provides a necessary baseline of accountability in unfamiliar environments. For a first-timer, that insulated fortress is worth the cost.
And to summarize my position, independent excursions are the key to unlocking massive financial savings, often cutting costs by 30 to 60%, while simultaneously providing small group intimacy and a much deeper, more authentic cultural immersion.
If you're willing to take the risk.
But the risk is manageable. By utilizing reputable, long-standing local operators who provide their own established, written, back-to-ship guarantees, families can fully mitigate the logistical risks while retaining complete control over their vacation experience. The cruise line's monopoly on safety is a highly effective marketing tool, but informed travelers can safely bypass it, putting their money directly into the local economy rather than a corporate middleman.
We do, however, have strong areas of convergence here. It seems we both agree that the right choice is highly dependent on the mechanics of the specific port you are visiting.
Absolutely. Context is everything in travel.
Right. If you are visiting a highly complex or remote port, take Skagway, Alaska, for example, where the famous White Pass train excursion has limited capacity that is heavily reserved by the cruise line, or somewhere with highly restricted government sites.
Then the logistical infrastructure of a ship tour is almost a necessity. You simply cannot replicate it independently.
Exactly.
I agree completely. But flip that to a highly walkable, self-guided port like Key West, Florida, or the walled city of Dubrovnik. In those instances, paying the ship an inflated premium for a guided walking tour is an incredibly poor use of a family's limited funds.
Yeah, I'll concede that.
Those ports are perfectly suited for independent exploration, where you can simply walk off the gangway and let the city unfold at your own pace.
It really comes down to how understanding the underlying mechanics of these systems, the reality of maritime liability laws, the hidden complexities of port tendering, and the actual track records of local vendors, how all of that allows travelers to make deeply informed decisions that match both their budget and their personal risk tolerance.
Precisely. And there is so much more nuance to explore in this material, especially regarding how local port economies actually capture the revenue from these independent tours, or how third-party travel insurance interplays with all of these risks to cover the exact gaps the cruise lines won't.
Which takes us back to where we started.
that billion-dollar industry waiting at the Excursions desk. Whether you buy the expensive VIP access for guaranteed boarding, curated safety, and cognitive relief,
Or you map the destination yourself to find those hidden, authentic corners, saving your budget for the things that really matter to your family.
the port is out there waiting for you. The question is simply how much risk you are willing to manage and how you choose to explore it.
Quick word from Adventures by K and M. If today's episode got you thinking about your next cruise, we'd love to help you plan it. Kim and I are full-service travel advisors specializing in luxury cruises for couples. We handle everything, the research, the booking, the details. So all you have to do is show up and enjoy. And here's the best part. Our planning services are completely free to you. We're paid by the cruise lines, not by you. So if you're ready to start dreaming, head to adventuresbykandem.info or grab the link in the description to book a free discovery call. We'd love to help you plan something unforgettable.